Well, with a disappointing 2025 in the books, we can start looking forward to a 2026 year in movies that is sure to be something. We've got some major releases coming out, and I'll be honest, some of them really get my motor running. Others, though, just feel like disasters waiting to happen. So, I've got 5 movies I'm seriously excited for, 5 I'm ready to mortgage the house I don't have to bet are going to be horrible, and 5 that could really go either way, but are definitely going to be worth seeing. Let's start with the category I'm just going to call Dead Films Walking. Just get the obvious one out of the way right off the bat. Yep, with Andor coming to an end, I have a feeling we're back to our regularly scheduled programming of being able to bet on Star Wars being bad, like being able to bet on Angel Reese missing her first shot. And it used to be kind of against the grain to have a dour outlook on Star Wars, particularly the movies, although we haven't had one of those in going on 7 years. I would have been crucified for predicting or even saying after the fact that Season 2 of The Mandalorian was bad, which, by the way, it was. But now if you look up the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, the first thing that comes up is a Forbes article taking a very dismal outlook on it. Disney Star Wars has missed on Seasons 2 and 3 of The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Kenobi, The Acolyte, and The Book of Boba Fett. Not to mention 3 of the 5 movies they released. TFA was at least well received when it came out. And I realize that past performance is not a guarantee of future failure, but it's a pretty good indicator. So to sum up The Mandalorian and Grogu,
I have a bad feeling about this.
next dead film walking is Toy Story 5. I'm not here to hate on Toy Story as a series, that would be stupid. Toy Story 1 and 2 are 2 of the best animated movies of all time. The third is a definite drop-off, but it was a nice way to wrap up the series, all things considered. And then, after another decade gap between movies, out of the woodwork came Toy Story 4, which wasted Buzz Lightyear and tried to basically replicate the emotional ending of the third movie, unsuccessfully, I might add. And the one word that rings in my ears thinking about that movie is, why?
Why? Why? Why? Why? Why?
And as true as that sentiment was for Toy Story 4, it is eminently more true for Toy Story 5. Seriously, who's asking for this movie? Who was sitting around thinking, man, I just feel like I never really got closure from Toy Story. They really need to make another one. It might be fine. In fact, it might be good. But it's definitely going to be unnecessary. In summary,
Let me die in peace.
up next is Supergirl. Look, I don't have anything against Supergirl. In fact, I don't know anything about her. I do know a lot about DC and the guy spearheading the new DCU, and this kind of goes back to The Mandalorian and Grogu. I think it's a safe bet to assume that a DC movie outside of a Batman movie isn't going to be good. Plus, a female-led superhero movie? When has that been a raging success? It could be, for sure, if you do it right. But I play the odds, and the odds are Hollywood isn't going to do it right. Now for one that has the potential to be the most divisive movie of the year, if not the decade. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Magician's Nephew. What do you get when you take C.S. Lewis's borderline scene-for-scene allegory for the gospel and put a feminist in charge of it, directing it for Netflix? Well, I'm not entirely sure because this exact situation has never happened before, but something tells me it might no longer remain the gospel-centered project it was always meant to be. And if there was any optimism for this film from not just a Christian perspective, but an even faithfulness to source material perspective, it was surely quashed by the revelation that Gerwig is talking to Meryl Streep about voicing Aslan. Even if that isn't the route she ends up taking it doesn't really matter. The fact that this is even a consideration for her is the problem. For those of you who know literally nothing about the Chronicles of Narnia or C.S. Lewis, the books and the original movie adaptations, flawed as they are a very on-the-nose allegory for the gospel story of Jesus Christ, who is represented by the lion Aslan. It is not subtle in any way. To even entertain the idea of having a woman voice a direct allegory to Jesus Christ is incredibly insulting to history, multiple religions, and mostly to about 2.5 billion Christians. I personally can't wait for a movie which portrays Muhammad as a lesbian. Oh, that would never happen? True bravery from these people in Hollywood, huh? And last but certainly not least for movies I have virtually no hopes for, Avengers Doomsday. If there's anything that reeks of desperation more than dudes swiping right indiscriminately on Tinder, it's gotta be a movie franchise paying an actor over $100 million to return after they tastefully killed off his character, who served as the patriarch of the most successful movie franchise of all time in the highest grossing movie ever, right? Marvel really thought they were going to move forward from the actors and characters that got them their success in favor of... I don't even know what their strategy has been post-Phase 3. They've seemingly had no direction, even before they had to jettison Jonathan Majors. They haven't had any really good origin movies for any new characters that excited people, and most of the continuations of the old characters were less than wonderful, to say the least. And now they're basically jumping right into this massive team-up movie. What's the plan here? Put aside the quality of the characters, which in most cases is considerably lower than in Phase 3, most of these characters have never shared the screen with hardly any of the others. Most of them we still hardly know because they've only had one movie. And the characters we do know well, in most cases, haven't had a movie in years. Combine all of that with a villain that has had zero introduction, and the only things I can gather from it are that 1, the MCU did not have any sort of plan mapped out for after Phase 3, and 2, the MCU forgot how to be patient, and they want to rush to Avengers Infinity War without doing any of the groundwork that preceded Infinity War.
Not a great plan.
Now we move on to the question marks. Will these movies be good, or will they also be colossal disappointments? Truly, only time will tell. Why don't we stay on Marvel for our first one, with Spider-Man Brand New Day? I guess we've moved on from incorporating the word home into the titles of these Spider-Man movies.
Whatever.
Exactly.
I really think the age of superheroes is kind of done. However, it hasn't been replaced with anything yet, so simply by inertia, we continue to get a steady drip of superhero movies, while studios haven't figured out what the next big thing to invest in is. But this Spider-Man franchise is about the only one left that I can get myself a little excited to see. Not because the first 3 were great or anything, they were good for the most part, but had plenty of flaws, especially the second and third. The one thing they consistently delivered on, though, was character, and with how No Way Home ended, there's definitely some interesting development that can be done. The danger and reason for skepticism is twofold. First, that Marvel falls into the trap of just restarting character development, following Peter trying to re-win MJ over, rather than having him take the fresh start they all got. The second danger lies in the same problem plaguing the MCU at large. With how disjointed and frankly horrendous the world building of the MCU has become, I think the best way to make this movie good would be to just leave it separate from all of that. Pretend as though the rest of the universe just doesn't exist and tell your own isolated story. Because trying to tie it into the rest of whatever this cinematic abortion has become is a losing battle. So we'll see if Disney tries to fight that battle.
Start? I don't feel so good.
Let's get away from superheroes for a minute. Don't worry, we'll be back at it before long. We'll swing over to a genre that has picked up some steam in recent years, the famous musician biopic. It feels like ever since Bohemian Rhapsody got Rami Malek a decidedly undeserved Oscar, studios have tried to replicate it with much less success, culminating in last year's horrible Bruce Springsteen movie. So these movies do not have a great track record with me as of late. But if there's any artist that could have a thriller of a movie made after him, it's the king of pop, right? Also, with Miles Teller in the leading role, I'm unsure of it, but I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about Michael. Our third question mark comes courtesy of Netflix, which is all you need to know to understand why it's getting a question mark. Peaky Blinders: The Immortal Man. Aside from Cillian Murphy being a must-watch in any project, it's exciting to have hopefully a fitting end to Tommy Shelby's story. But I'm sure Stranger Things fans felt the same way about getting season 5, and look how that turned out. Anytime Netflix is making anything, it's a big proceed with caution, and this is no different.
How many fathers, right? How many sons, yeah? Have you cut, killed, murdered? You sent them straight to fucking hell, ain't you? Just like me!
Okay, back to superheroes, or supervillains, as it were, with Clayface. I know I basically said I'm out on DC earlier, but Batman and his corresponding villains seem to be the exception to that, Joker fully a deuce excluded, with the Batman and the Penguin show. Now, Clayface could be interesting. All I know about him as a character is from playing the Arkham video games. I think he's a failed actor turned supervillain. Better than a failed painter, I guess. But I feel like that's kind of a dream role for actors. On the other hand, there might be such thing as too obscure a character, at least when it comes to the box office.
Sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit.
And last but not least in the question mark category, sometimes the premise of a movie is so outlandishly stupid it almost feels like it has to be good. Like Ratatouille or Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And I really want to file The Sheep Detectives under the same category. I honestly have never been so intrigued by a movie that on its face is just so dumb. A story about a shepherd who reads his sheep murder mystery stories at bedtime who subsequently dies, leaving the sheep to try and help an incompetent detective solve the herder mystery. That sounds like it's almost on the level of Sharknado, until you realize it was written by the same guy who wrote Chernobyl. And I just can't wait to see if this will be proof that any premise can make a good story if it's executed well. And now I get to be optimistic, and really that's the most fun part. I don't have any real order I'm going by, so let's just start with Project Hail Mary. Flashback a little over 10 years ago to one of the great sci-fi movies of all time. No, not Interstellar, maybe the most overrated movie of all time. I'm talking about The Martian, the hard science fiction movie Interstellar wishes it was. Well, the book The Martian was based off of was written by Andy Weir, who also wrote Project Hail Mary, and it seems to be kind of a similar setup in that it follows a main character who is alone in the cosmos. So we're going to get to see Ryan Gosling lead a movie basically on his own with no one else to bounce off of for the lion's share of it, the way Matt Damon carried The Martian. I'm sure it's going to once again be scientifically accurate to a T, which you know gets my engineering motor running. Basically, I'm not going to bet against Andy Weir. I'm just going to grab my popcorn and enjoy the show. Next, we'll go across the... Well, if the Atlantic Ocean is the pond, is the Pacific the lake? Nah, whatever. I'm going with it. Let's go across the lake to Japan for Godzilla Minus Zero. It's weird how we have our American Godzilla, and then the Japanese have their Godzilla, and they're making movies at the same time. Like Godzilla Minus One and Godzilla multiplied by Kong, the New Empire, came out within 4 months of each other. And I can see why people from other countries think Americans are stupid. Because ours really was just big monster go rawr. But Godzilla Minus One is actually a really good movie, and proof that sometimes having a tighter budget is a good thing, because you can't rely on having flashy CGI. Instead of just a big monster fight, Godzilla Minus One is really a human story, with the actual monster being used sparingly enough that even with a budget of $10 to $15 million, it won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects. Really makes you wonder what our American studios are doing with their hundreds of million-dollar projects that look like crap. In any sense, the success of Godzilla Minus One definitely merited excitement for its sequel. This one will be short because I don't know what I even have to say to you to convince you to get excited for it. Dune Messiah. Maybe I'll finally get around to reading the books before this one finally comes out. Or maybe I won't, and I'll just keep going in Clueless to maximize my enjoyment of it. Dune really is sci-fi done right. And here when I say sci-fi, I don't mean the same kind of sci-fi that The Martian and Project Hail Mary fall into, but the otherworldly sci-fi. Because it finally puts an emphasis on the world. Something Star Wars has always kind of neglected in its movies, even the good ones, is world building. And when you finally get it in things like Andor and parts of the Clone Wars, it's awesome to explore this new galaxy. Dune does that. It drops you into a new galaxy with varying factions and peoples, and then it actually explores in meaningful ways the parties involved in its central conflict. I look forward to the series hopefully keeping it up.
You see this? Huh? See this? This is sand. Yeah. It's sand. You know it's going to be 100 years from now, huh? It's going to be sand!
Now, for the last two movies on this list, you're going to hear a couple of potentially hot takes. The first surrounds our favorite foot fetish director, Quentin Tarantino. And it's that his best movie is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yes, that's right, Pulp Fiction is criminally overrated, and let's establish this while we're at it. If you think that The Hateful Eight is in his top 5, you're gonna need to dig yourself out of a hole before we start lending credence to any of your movie-related arguments. But all of that is beside the point, which is not to defend Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or tear down The Hateful Eight. The point is that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, wherever you rank it, gave us one of the coolest movie characters of all time in Cliff Booth. And so Brad Pitt, who seemingly can do no wrong, leading his origin story, The Adventures of Cliff Booth, is a movie that has my full and complete support. You're telling me the coolest movie character ever is going to get an entire movie of Quentin Tarantino dialogue with him at the helm?
I'll make that deal. How about you bitch? You make that deal?
I'd make that deal.
I don't blame you. Damn good deal.
Last but not least is one that might actually belong in the question mark category, but just has so much potential that it has to go here. And that is, of course, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Now, I told you that there were going to be two hot takes to end this video. The first was that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is Tarantino's best movie. The second is that Christopher Nolan is overrated. Now, I'm not saying for one second that Nolan lacks talent. He really is a great director. I'm not saying that he's not intelligent. In fact, I'm actually saying the exact opposite. I think Christopher Nolan is often too smart for his own movie's good. The first way that shows up is in the kinds of stories he tries to tell. Two films of his that are genuinely not well-crafted stories, namely Tenet and Interstellar, are instances where he has taken an incredibly complicated, often theoretical subject and tried to craft a story that both tries to make sense of particularly abstract concepts that fill up volumes of textbooks and craft a logically following story around it. Something that I just don't think is possible inside a 3-hour time constraint. The other way Nolan's intellect often plays to the detriment of his movies is when he tries to do too much with a story. Dunkirk on its own is a harrowing story of bravery in World War II. I think that Christopher Nolan's insistence on not only telling a great story, but telling it in the most interesting way, such as 3 different plot lines over 3 different timelines converging on the same point, doesn't necessarily add to the quality of his films. And it's the latter manifestation that gives me pause for concern about the Odyssey. We are talking about arguably the single most influential piece of fictional literature ever written. It and the Iliad created the blueprint for the classic hero's journey. All Christopher Nolan needs to do to make a generational movie is to just tell the story that has already been written. Because he really is a great director, and that movie would be phenomenal. And I'm not talking about the armor or the diversity of the cast or even how closely it follows the original. The original is a 500 or 600 page poem. It's not going to be possible to adapt it line for line in a movie. I'm talking about Christopher Nolan thinking that he needs to make the Odyssey more interesting. I'm talking about Nolan thinking he can improve upon one of the greatest pieces of literature ever written that has stood the test of time for nearly 3,000 years by jumping back and forth between timelines or something. If he just tells the story that Homer wrote, the Odyssey, directed by Christopher Nolan, will be the movie of the year. There's not a doubt in my mind. The wait, it's almost over.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the
Everybody
procedure,
stay
everyone?
calm.
What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Wait.
Everybody calm down.
So 2026 is here, and it should be a fun one. We're going to break down each one of these movies and so many more throughout the year, along with continuing some series like our scene dissections and systematic review of the destruction of Star Wars by Disney. It'll all be here on this channel, where you get the benefit of hindsight in real time. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it. We're going to have a lot of fun.